Now let's go just a little deeper into interfaces, and in a video, this is going to be a two-parter by the way, entitled Interface Implementations. Let's review just a second here. Interfaces are contracts, okay? We're okay with that. If you've watched the videos entitled Understanding Interfaces and Interface Examples, interfaces lay out properties, methods, and so forth that a class must implement. So all members of the interface must be implemented in the class that inherits from the interface. However, there are two ways a class can implement an interface, and that's what we want to key on in this video and the second one in part 2. We can implicitly implement an interface, or we can explicitly implement an interface. Now the difference here is a little bit subtle, and it's kind of hard to see when you're looking at the documentation, so I'm going to step you through this in code. But understand, first of all, with implicit implementation, the interface members are defined in the interface without access modifiers. The implementation methods in the class use the public modifier, and the implementations are then visible when we instantiate an object from the class that's inheriting that interface, right? And we hit, the name of our object and the period, IntelliSense, and the compiler sees all the public methods, and we can just access them. But explicit implementation is a little different. The interface members are once again defined without access modifiers. However, when we define them in our class, when we define the implementation method in our class, it also is defined without a modifier. In effect, by default, it's private, which means it's not going to show up to us as one of the methods available from outside on that object. And what we're going to do then is we're going to explicitly identify that method using the interface and method name in the class. Now, the explicit implementation of a method makes that method visible when you use an object that's instantiated from the class, although it's accessed through the explicitly implemented interface. Now, I know that last sentence probably didn't mean anything to you. The best way to understand that one is to see it in code. And so that's what we're going to do right now. We are going to jump out to Visual Studio, and we're going to create a new project. And we're going to call this project Interface Implementation. And that's INTERFACE. Implementation. Okay, and so we'll hit OK. We're going to do our form, our button. I don't know if we'll get as far as implementing it or not. You can go ahead and play with it once you see it coded up. But what we're going to do is we're going to build a basic interface, and then we're going to take a look at implicit and explicit implementation. So we'll go as far as we can in part 1 here. Then we'll jump to part 2. First thing I want to do, I need to create an interface. So I'm going to open the Solution Explorer. I will right click on my project name. I'll choose Add. I'll add a new item, and I will add an interface, and I will default to Interface 1. I just double clicked on Interface, and I just let it default to the name Interface 1. Okay, and I didn't mean to do that. Okay, so Interface 1. Now, what do we want in Interface 1? Well, we're going to basically require two methods here. One, void do this, our old friend, and do that. Pretty straightforward, right? So there's Interface 1. Now, if we go out and add a class, so we'll go back into Solution Explorer. We will right-click on the project name. We will add a class. And we will just let that be class 1. Then we are going to click Add. And if we go into the class 1 code, we need to implement do this and do that, because that's part of this interface. Now I want to show you something you can do in Visual Studio. I can right click on the interface name, and I can tell it to lay those out, okay? And notice I should be able to, I don't know why I cannot. Oh, in the class, I want to inherit interface 1. Okay, now right here that my brain's on, okay, I didn't pay my brain bill last month, I think, and they're cut the thing off. Notice if I right click on interface 1 when I'm inheriting at the class, I can implement the interface. Okay, I can implement it implicitly or explicitly, and I'll do it implicitly. And notice what it did. Okay, it just put the public void do this and the public void do that, and it's just going to throw an exception if I try to run this. Okay, and so we have both of those out there now, right? And so we have now implemented this interface. And if I try to compile this, I shouldn't have any major problems because I have inherited the interface and I have implemented it. Okay, well, now let's do something else. Let's add a little twist here. Okay, I'm going to right click and I'm going to go add a second interface. I'm going to add a new item. And I will choose interface. It's going to default to interface 2. We'll take that to make it easy. And on interface 2, I want to do this. Now, some of you guys are saying, hey, wait a minute, Mark, you've already got to do this. And that's what we want to talk about with explicit implementation. I'm going to end part 1 here. Join me in part 2. We're going to look at how we can deal with two interfaces that have the same method names that have to be enforced in the same class. Join me then.